We're not even pretending any longer that this is Israel's war. Again, there's no mention by Trump as he talks about Netanyahu or what Israel wants. There's no pretense that they're in charge. This is Trump's war.
There's Glenn Greenwald recognizing what many of us seem to be true today. Initially, when Israel first struck Iran with that initial wave of attacks, Trump seemed to kind of distance himself from Israel, but in the days since, now he's openly boastful about it and seems to be proud of it. So let's watch what Glenn has to say about it and react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
When the Israelis first attacked Iran, the Americans, including Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, were very eager rhetorically to distance themselves from it, coming out that night and saying, this is a unilateral Israeli attack, the United States is not involved. Now, there was a lot of skepticism, including from me, about whether that could possibly be true. It was unimaginable that the Israelis, given their full-scale dependence and reliance on the United States for military support, financial support, diplomatic support, would possibly launch a major war of this kind without not only advising Donald Trump in advance, but getting his approval. After all, Trump had been pretending to restrain the Israelis. He publicly was telling them as late as that day that he doesn't want them to attack Iran because that would sabotage the diplomatic resolution that he still believed he could achieve. But it was inconceivable that the Israelis would just go and defy Trump and launch a war on their own. And increasingly every day it's become clearer and clearer through reporting, particularly through Donald Trump's own statements, that he not only knew about the war in advance, that he not only greenlit the war in advance, but that he ordered his administration to plan the war directly with Benjamin Netanyahu. And especially once he began to see that the war was perceived as a success, Trump began getting more and more explicit, more and more blatant about his view that the credit for this war goes first to him.
Just like Trump. And it's a little bit murky still and nebulous as to how far in advance Trump began planning this with Netanyahu, how much Trump knew about it. In those early days when Trump said, hey, this is Israel's thing, I'm not in on it, you know, a lot of Trump's fan base was saying like, hey, wait and see, look at what Trump's saying. He's not in on it. He's negotiating with Iran. But we soon have come to find out that those negotiations were a sham, and there were some telltale signs that I didn't particularly pick up on at the time, but one of them is they changed from no nuclear weapons program to no nuclear enrichment of uranium. And that's a big difference, and no one really had brought that upon Iran in the past as a requirement because they need that for a nuclear power for their citizens. So yeah, Glenn's right.
That he's the one who's essentially the author of this war, the father of it, the person who's now presiding over it. And over the past 24 hours, Trump's posture has dramatically transformed in a way that I will confess I find genuinely alarming for reasons I'm about to show you. Donald Trump is not just talking any longer about America having participated in this war or supporting the Israeli effort. He's now talking about this war as though it is his, as though it is the United States' war that we started for noble ends and that he intends to conclude through what he is now calling unconditional surrender.
Yeah, he's basically taken full ownership of this war, using words like we to describe the campaigns, tweeting about that the leader of Iran, the supreme leader, is safe for now, but he better negotiate or else. The U.S. is clearly steering this with the Israelis. It's a collaborative partnership. This is a unique relationship in U.S. history and world history, frankly, where Israel and the United States have this attached at the hip relationship, and the U.S. gets sucked into Israel wars, and the U.S. presidents are completely complicit in generally what Israel's always wanted to do, certainly what Netanyahu always wanted to do.
And he's no longer even pretending what they were trying to feign just a few days ago, which is that the Israelis launched this war unilaterally. Donald Trump is now saying, this is our war. We're the ones who are dominating Iran. We're the ones who are beating Iran, and we won't even accept a ceasefire or negotiations of any kind. We want a complete end to this issue forever. And he presented all of those views, all of those proclamations, not in a address to the nation, though he does intend to give one. I'm not sure exactly when. But he did so instead in a series of tweets, or whatever they call postings on True Social, that he later then posted on X, and we want to just show you several of them. This was late last night after we concluded our show yesterday evening where he said, America first means many great things, including the fact that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Make America great again.
Well, then good, mission accomplished, because they don't have a nuclear weapon. And we probably would have seen it by now if they did. And you know who else said that they don't have a nuclear weapon? Even the U.S. intelligence services, the CIA, and the Director of National Intelligence explicitly said that. And she was drawing upon information from not only the CIA, but also MI6 and Mossad. Even Mossad doesn't say that Iran has a nuclear weapon. You know, they've constantly said they're weeks away since about 1990 frickin' 2, but they don't have one now. So mission accomplished, Trump. They don't have one.
So that's pretty standard course for him just supporting the Israeli war based on this utterly unproven premise that Iran was seeking nuclear weapons, something we've been being told for 30 to 40 years, only for it to always become disproven. And Trump now has just asserted, even though his own Director of National Security, Tulsi Gabbard, told the Senate 3 months ago that it wasn't true, that Iran suddenly decided that it was going to seek a nuclear weapon and was very close to getting one, and that's why this war was justified.
And also, Gabbard said that there's no evidence they've even restarted the program since it was shut down in 2003. That's an even further, solid decree showing that they're not pursuing this. And again, this is CIA. This is the U.S. intelligence services that are the entities most likely to drum up war propaganda. We saw that with Iraq especially.
He was asked on Air Force One last night by CNN's Caitlin Collins about Tulsi Gabbard's statement to the Senate that the consensus of the intelligence community was that, in fact, Iran was not seeking nuclear weapons. They had a nuclear energy program, as they've had one for many years, but that the Ayatollah had not authorized nor decided that the Iranians should pursue a nuclear weapon, that their posture with regard to nuclear weapons hasn't changed at all. And she asked him, this is not some random person inside the intelligence community. This is not some person who isn't loyal to you. This is the person you fought to get confirmed into this position by arguing that Tulsi Gabbard would clean up the intelligence community to make it reliable enough for you to depend upon when making decisions. She's the one that you picked.
And her Senate confirmation was by the slimmest margins, by the way. It was close. He put a lot of his political capital behind getting her through, whipped a lot of the senators to do that. The closest people to Trump did that, in particular with RFK and her, because they knew that they would be controversial. And then you're going to just brush off her opinion? And it's not even her opinion. It's actually just relaying the information from the intelligence community. That seems to have been what happened.
And she said the consensus of the intelligence community and the intelligence itself, which she's reviewed, is that Iran was not, in fact, pursuing nuclear weapons. And here's what he had to say when she asked him that.
You don't believe Iran should be able to have a nuclear weapon, but how close do you personally think that they were to getting one? Because Tulsi Gabbard testified in March that the intelligence community said Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having one. I got us one on you.
It was a little low, so let's just play this over. So here's Caitlin Collins asking him about Tulsi Gabbard's statement.
Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapon.
I don't care what she said. I think they were very close to having one. I got us one on you at this.
So he says, I don't care what she said. That's kind of a humiliating statement to make about the Director of National Intelligence that you chose. I don't care what she says. The whole reason she's there is to provide you with the intelligence. But obviously Trump is deeply vested in the idea that this is a noble war that he helped launch, that he has now ordered U.S. military assets to fight in. There are already U.S. military assets active in that region, intercepting ballistic missiles sent from Iran, both in the skies and other ways. And they're certainly active in providing intelligence and in planning the war.
Yeah, I have to agree. This one really shocked me, actually. I know Trump is Trump. He's, prone to bombatism and, crazy comments and, high-powered rhetoric at times. But for him to just brush off Tulsi Gabbard, his hand-picked DNI that he fought for, it really was kind of confusing to me. I mean, even Trump, I didn't think would be like that toward people that were hand-chosen by him in his campaign through their support behind him. A lot of people didn't necessarily think Tulsi would probably do that in the months leading up to the campaign. She did. And it just seems to not bode well for the Trump administration. It seems like he's more won over by Netanyahu than Tulsi Gabbard, the Israel first mentality, the Israel first foreign policy, and now he's taken ownership of this war. Does he come up with any evidence to suggest why he thinks they were closer than the Director of National Intelligence? No, he doesn't produce that information whatsoever. It's just, I think they're close to getting one. Well, that's what Netanyahu's been saying for about 35 years, too. He doesn't produce any evidence, and all the evidence to the contrary has been produced by Tulsi Gabbard.
And now we're getting closer and closer to the moment where Trump is making very clear that he's now going to start giving the Israelis everything that they demanded, as American presidents typically do, in this case meaning the B-2 bombers that are uniquely large enough to carry the bunker busters that are needed to destroy Iran's premier enrichment facilities that are buried very deep underground. The Israelis can't do that on their own. And here was what Trump said this morning that I found to be the most significant, at least at that point of his pronouncement. He said this, quote, "We now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran." And obviously, to me at least, the key word there is we. We now have complete and total control over the skies over Iran. Now, unless Trump identifies as an Israeli or believes that Israel is a state in the United States, something that a lot of people do believe, they don't usually say that, but they do think that way, then we now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran must mean that in Trump's mind, it's the United States military that's responsible for this war, that's fighting this war, that this is now an American war. We have complete and total control of the skies over Iran. He went on to say Iran had good sky trackers and other defensive equipment and plenty of it, but it doesn't compare to American-made, conceived, and manufactured, quote, stuff. Nobody does it better than the good old USA. So Israel is barely even mentioned in this framework any longer in Trump's mind. This is a war between the United States and Iran. He's giving credit to the Iranians for saying you have a lot of good sky trackers and air defense systems, but we don't care because it's no match for our technology. He's not even mentioning Israel anymore. It's just absorbed into Donald Trump's mind that this is his war, the war that he planned, that he plotted, and to the extent that he perceives it to be a success, which he clearly does, he wants full credit for it, not even supporting or partial credit for it.
Yeah, so if you're a Trump supporter and you were under the illusion that, hey, the U.S. was going to generally stay out of this, you know, notwithstanding, obviously, the U.S. funds Israel, provides intelligence or whatever, but they would stay out of this operation, well, even Trump isn't going along with that anymore. Trump isn't even trying to sell that narrative anymore. He's taking credit for it, total ownership of it, and seems to be proud of it. He's saying, you know, there's lots of dead Iranians. We control the skies. The supreme leader is cowering in fear, or whatever he said. He basically tweeted that, you know, we're going to spare his life for now. We know where he is, but he better come to the negotiation table. Well, this isn't a negotiation. This is war. This is a strike. And under the Constitution, the president can't unilaterally do that anyways. The Congress needs to do it. Obviously, we're living in a post-constitutional world, especially on war powers. A war hasn't been officially declared since World War II. But regardless of that, this is just a terrible policy. Regime change is being celebrated right now by so many, even in Trump's camp, after listening to his rhetoric and cheering it about how the U.S. should stay out of the Middle East affairs, stay out of Middle East wars. It's crazy.
Here's Trump issuing another tweet or whatever he called another truth on Truth Social. He says, quote, "We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He's an easy target, but is safe there. We're not going to take him out, kill, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention to this matter." So he's saying we know exactly where Iran's leader is, and we're going to let him live. And I feel like this kind of language, we're going to let you live for now. We're not going to kill you for now.
How gracious.
But if you shoot at any American asset, any American base in the region, which the Iranians have made quite clear they don't intend to do unless the United States attacks and bombs Iran directly. And obviously, if the United States attacks and bombs Iran directly, you have to expect that Iran's going to attack back, just like they're doing with Israel. I keep hearing these American media people talking about these ballistic missiles sent from Iran as though there's some sort of like aberrational, shockingly immoral, disproportionate response. Israel started the war. Unprovoked, they sent airplanes and missiles and bombs and had intelligence assets inside Iran shooting missiles and bombs, killing the military command, killing their families, killing whoever had the misfortune of living in those buildings, killing all sorts of civilians. Of course, Iran is going to shoot back at Israel with whatever they have. Any country would. And the same is true for U.S. involvement in the war. If the United States directly starts bombing Iran, as Donald Trump increasingly is hinting and suggesting that he intends to do, and all signs suggest is inevitable, of course Iran is going to then shoot at American bases and American service members and other American interests in the region. And then Donald Trump is saying, if you do that, we're going to murder the leader of Iran, which, if that's a war tactic, I guess it means you can bomb the White House, you can kill Netanyahu. Putin can kill Vladimir Zelensky by these standards.
Yeah, and I'm hoping the U.S. troops in the region don't suffer any kind of catastrophes here, any attacks, any strikes, because Iran has much more firepower than many of the other powers in the Middle East, maybe the most outside of Israel. This is not Yemen we're talking about. This is not Iraq relatively in 2003. They have ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones. They've used them. We know about them. So the U.S. troops in the region are essentially a sitting duck right now because of how this war is being fought so brazenly by the Trump administration. The sneak attack that he seems to have been in on for several days leading up to it, at least several days. We're not exactly sure how long, but at some point those negotiations changed from earnest to completely swept up in war, in the Zionist war project and regime change in Iran, which again, Netanyahu's wanted forever. So that's where we're at right now, and I hate to say it, and it also doesn't bode well for how other negotiating partners might view this, like Russia. What makes us think that Trump can even secure peace in Ukraine at this point? He's not trustworthy at all. He's still bankrolling Ukraine, and how he's treating Iran here duplicitously, it doesn't really strike trust into the heart of Putin. I'm going to just venture to guess.
So this is Trump threatening Iran's leader directly, giving him orders, saying we're going to let you live. And that's why I say I think that there's a kind of power intoxication that has entered Trump's head. I don't mean to psychoanalyze him, but I've certainly never heard him speaking about war and destruction in these kinds of almost messianic terms. You know, like he's saying, you're going to sign the deal that we told you to sign. And he's basically now saying he's not interested in negotiations any longer. He only wants unconditional surrender.
He's going to give them a deal that they can't refuse, but I think the problem is they're going to have to end up refusing it because it's clear that regime change is the objective here. Trump might not say that, but that is the objective from the Israeli perspective. It's not to curtail the nuclear weapons program, because then they would have allowed those negotiations to go through. And that is the biggest problem for Netanyahu, because that would have taken the justification off the table he needed for regime change. This was opportunistic, a timed decision that Trump seems to have been in on, but it seems like Trump was swayed in that direction at some point. And it's a true shame, because Trump came into office under some pretty good, relatively non-interventionist rhetoric when it came to the Middle East. We knew he was going to be owned by the Israel lobby. We knew how close he was to Israel. He boasts about it openly. He's consistently done that. But we did not necessarily think that he would launch a new war in Iran. His cabinet was split on that. Remember, a few months ago, there were stories out there that he had essentially stopped a war. Well, not so, it sounds like. It sounds like he was just won over by the military-industrial complex, the Israel lobby, Netanyahu, and all the neocons in the world. It's a neocon triumph. It really is.
It's like a power kind of dynamic that is driving Trump. Remember, this is somebody who ran on a platform of saying he wants his legacy to be a peacemaker.
Yeah.
That one of the worst and dumbest things the United States has done, one of the most self-destructive, is pursued wars in the Middle East, especially regime change wars, which this is quickly becoming. And now Certainly. Here he is just being pulled every day more and more into it. And he seems to be taking a lot of pleasure in it.
Yeah, he does. And if you're skeptical that you're still skeptical thinking that, hey, regime change isn't actually the goal here. There's no evidence to suggest that. Well, why did they issue evacuation orders for Tehran then? Because Tehran doesn't have any of their nuclear enrichment facilities. That's a civilian epicenter. It's a metropolis. It's the cultural center of Iran, with the leadership there. And, I think about 15 million people within Tehran and the immediate outskirts, kind of like the suburbs. So why would you evacuate that if your goal was not regime change? It's like, some kind of shock and awe campaign to bring them to the table? No, it's nonsense. This is a regime change operation. At least it is right now.
Really enjoying this posture of war leader. Perhaps of all the things that have been posted, and we're going to still show you some others, this might actually be the most disturbing. This wasn't written by Trump. This was written by Mike Huckabee, who is an end times evangelical, someone who believes, and that's why Trump made him U.S. ambassador to Israel, the first non-Jewish person to ever hold that position, that the United States has a biblical mandate to protect and support and strengthen Israel, that Israel has to be fully united and dominate and occupy and control all of the land under it, including the West Bank and Gaza, so that in Mike Huckabee's end times messianic religious view, that's when Jesus will come back and then consign everybody who's a non-believer, including all Jews, to hell unless they first repent and recognize Jesus as their Savior. And that explains a lot of why there's so much support in the U.S. Congress for paying for Israel, for supporting Israel, for arming Israel. It's a religious belief. It's a theocratic belief that the Bible mandates that the U.S. government support Israel, strengthen Israel, protect Israel, even more so than it has to protect the United States, because this is not a nationalistic mandate, but a biblical one.
Yeah, and I'm big on religious tolerance, but, outside of this, I won't even deal with the religious arguments. I totally disagree with that, but it's insane. But Mike Huckabee has also said that he doesn't even recognize the settlements on the West Bank at all. He just says that's Israel. He doesn't recognize any flaw that the Israelis ever had, any malignment they've ever made toward the Palestinians. He essentially doesn't consider them people by many of the words he said. He's the worst potential ambassador you probably ever could have, dreaded to be the ambassador to Israel, but he is that. He's Israel first through and through, and that's why Trump nominated him. So, I don't know. It's not surprising he wants to aid Israel. Frankly, I don't really care about the justification, whether it's religious or not. I just think it's America last. It always has been America last, and to get involved in these wars, we already did that in Iraq and Syria and Libya and Yemen at some point too, including last year. So the U.S. is just getting sucked into this thing, and yeah, there are people complicit in the U.S. that want that. The neocons, the Zionists, the military-industrial complex, a lot of establishment leftists now are total regime change shills when, the establishment left actually used to be fairly anti-war, even in the Bush administration. I think that sector of the populace vanished the moment Obama swore into office, and it's never truly returned, even after Trump got elected. They don't have a problem with Trump's wars, Trump's strikes. They didn't even pretend to when he exacerbated wars in Yemen and Syria, ramped up the bombing in Afghanistan, and they're mostly staying silent about this, by the way. Isn't that crazy? That Trump can do no right on any other thing except for this. And we're seeing that play out. There's a mass bipartisan consensus on bellicose foreign policy in Washington. The Democrats are involved in it too.
And Mike Huckabee wrote Donald Trump a text that Trump, when he received, obviously was very moved by, believes in, wants the world to see, because Trump immediately, or I don't know if it was immediate, but quickly after, went and posted it himself on his Truth Social. And I think the text of this email is very important. It's from Mike Huckabee, a pastor, politician, ambassador, and great person. That's what Trump introduced him as. And here's the text, quote, "Mr. President, God spared you in Butler, Pennsylvania to be the most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. The decisions on your shoulders I would not want to be made by anyone else. You have many voices speaking to you, sir, but there is only one voice that matters, his voice. I am your appointed servant in this land, and am available for you, but I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I don't think anyone's confused about what Mike Huckabee means there. What was Harry Truman's consequential decision of 1945, what shaped history, what made him so consequential? Obviously, it was ending World War II by dropping 2 nuclear bombs on Japan. One in Nagasaki, one in Hiroshima. And that's obviously what Mike Huckabee is suggesting God wants Trump to do, or at least something very similar to it in this case.
It's just ludicrous. It's just really ludicrous that a state that has nukes but doesn't want to admit it because it would subject them to IAEA regulations that Iran is under and compliant with, by the way. That the ultimate irony here is that Israel is apprehending the acquisition of a nuclear weapon by a party that doesn't have one, and they're a party that does have one and won't admit it. And this is crazy.
He goes on, quote, I don't reach out to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven, and that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. You sent me to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and to make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment. The moment sought you. It is my honor to serve you. Mike Huckabee. Now, the tone of that text is really not the typical tone of an ambassador to the president. It is basically someone who believes that they are required to assume a supremely humble position because they're talking to a person chosen by God to carry out an extremely important task. And that important task is to force Iran into complete and total surrender, to no longer negotiate with them by using all force necessary to require them to do so. It's not a very vague or difficult to discern text.
Yeah, I mean, using religious language to justify killing people, that's essentially what it was. I mean, I thought Christ was the Prince of Peace, but here we have Huckabee justifying, these strikes, which were preemptive. They were aggressive. They were unprovoked, no matter what Israel says. And the U.S. is now complicit in this, and Huckabee thinks this is ordained by God. I don't. So, what can I say? He has a right to his religious beliefs, but when it kills a bunch of people, I get a little bit angry. My ire is certainly raised under those situations because this won't pay dividends. People said the same thing. I remember in the days leading up to the war in Iraq, the same kind of rhetoric was used. And I think this one's going to pan out much the same.
His meaning is viscerally clear, immediately clear. And after receiving that email, Donald Trump began posting things like this that suggest that he, too, sees himself in this manner. Here's what he posted in the late morning or early afternoon in all capital letters, all uppercase letters. Unconditional surrender.
Breaking. The U.S. has unconditionally surrendered to Israel. Breaking. Because that's more likely to be the truth right now.
Which, of course, that was the term used by Harry Truman and the British for what they were dictating to the Germans, what they were dictating to Japan. And the idea of using 2 nuclear weapons in Japan, according to Harry Truman, was the best way, the fastest way, the most effective way to ensure that the Japanese would agree to unconditional surrender, which is what they agreed to after those nuclear bombs were dropped. And history debates whether they were going to anyway, whether it was really necessary, but that was the history. That's clearly what Mike Huckabee is referencing.
I won't go off on too much of a tangent here, but Eisenhower, Leahy, MacArthur, and several others did not think they were necessary and believed that Japan was already surrendering. In fact, Japan offered surrender terms in May, but they wanted conditions for the emperor to be protected and have some legal immunities. The emperor actually did eventually get some legal immunities, but they still dropped the bombs nonetheless. Too much about that, I won't digress, but yeah, it's definitely controversial.
So we're clearly now in a position where we are dictating the terms of how this war ends. We're not even pretending any longer that this is Israel's war. Again, there's no mention by Trump as he talks about Netanyahu or what Israel wants. There's no pretense if they're in charge This is Trump's war. And his posture, the way he's speaking, the way he's writing, everything suggests that he's very intoxicated by this role. Here he posted on True Social after that, quote, I have now not reached out to Iran for, quote, peace talks in any way, shape, or form, responding to a news report suggesting that he did. This is just more highly fabricated fake news. If they want to talk, meaning Iran, they know how to reach me. They should have taken the deal that was on the table. It would have saved a lot of lives. Now, again, the deal that was on the table was one that everybody knew in advance that Iran could never and would never accept. And I think this is one of the points that has become most obscured deliberately, most obfuscated. Everybody always understood that Iran was going to have a program of enriching uranium and centrifuges because those are necessary to have a nuclear energy program.
I think it's also necessary for some medicines, too, just to add to Glenn's point. But exactly right. This is a point that a lot of people aren't covering right now.
And the treaties and conventions that that Israel signed give Iran and every other country the absolute sovereign right to have a nuclear energy program, despite their commitment not to develop nuclear weapons.
And Iran is a member state of the IAEA and is compliant. You know, some people said that their uranium is being enriched above 60% or whatever, but they're right there on the line. And frankly, if I was Iran, I probably would be too. If I was attacked by Israel and possibly the United States to come soon, yeah, I would be right up against that line until they do attack so I could acquire a nuke as soon as possible. I mean, that's what North Korea did. And regime change there is essentially impossible. Everyone knows it. And then Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons program, and look at what happened to him. So yeah, I don't blame Iran for kind of skirting that line, but everyone knew that Iran was going to have that for nuclear energy. This is a poorer country in many places. They need that energy. Heck, the U.S. needs that energy. I think only one or two nuclear power plants has even been created over the last 30 years. It's cheap energy, efficient energy, and if you're a climataholic, it doesn't emit CO2 into the atmosphere anyways. But we've only had two of them because of regulations, but I digress.
And the way that you do that is by ensuring that they're only enriching uranium up to a certain percentage, 3%, 4%, enough to enable them to have nuclear energy, but not go to 90%, which is where they could have breakout for nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And Steve Witkoff began the negotiations publicly on Fox by saying, and he was subject to a lot of attacks from this, for saying this, was that in the negotiations, of course, we're going to be open to having Iran maintain centrifuges and enrich uranium, because the idea is they can have an energy program but not a nuclear program. And at some point along the way, a nuclear weapons program, at some point along the way, that completely changed in Trump's mind to any attempt by Iran to demand the right of enrichment, something they've had forever, something they had in the Iran deal, something that international law accepts that they have the right to have. And that's why they could never give up the right to enrich, the right to nuclear energy, because it's a sovereign right that every country has, including them. It'd be a humiliation for them to give that up. On top of which, their view is we want to use nuclear energy to power our country so we can sell our oil to as much as possible, that we don't want to consume our oil, we want to sell it.
Yes, this is such a good point. I'm glad Glenn is bringing it up. Very few people are bringing this up. At some point, those negotiations changed from something that seemed like it would possibly create a new JCPOA. That would be an agreement where Iran would allow for inspections, close down any semblance of its nuclear power, nuclear weapons program that was inspectable by the United States or foreign entities to become compliant and settle this. It went from that, not touching the normal nuclear uranium enrichment program that's necessary for power, to an absolute non-starter, full of poison pills that was never going to be acceptable to Iran. And I think the purpose for that was to sell this war. Look, Iran's rejected the deal. You see Trump tweeting about it. But that was never going to happen in the first place. This is a poison pill non-starter. If you're going to say they have to shut down all their nuclear power, the people will suffer immensely. It's crazy.
And so when Trump says they should have taken the deal that I told them to take, he means a completely untenable deal for Iran, one that they could never and would have never accepted. And had that been clear from the start that Trump would have gotten to the point set up for him by Netanyahu and Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, that a deal means dismantling the nuclear program, no enrichment whatsoever, there would have been no point in negotiating. Everybody would have known ahead of time this is going to go nowhere.
Yeah.
But Witkoff said the opposite.
Yeah, Glenn is so right. This is how the scheme changed. And this is a scheme because it seems like Trump played right into it, at least at the very end. When they switched this, I think that the groundwork was being laid for this strike and the U.S. was involved because that's an absolute non-starter. Everyone knew that Iran couldn't have accepted that in any regard. And it provides the ammo and justification for a war propaganda campaign. They rejected the deal. Now here we are. Here's our bombs. We're going to assist Israel and strike you. And Trump's tweeting all about that. He's taken ownership of this war. Even if you were skeptical to the extent that the U.S. was involved, the last day or two should have made that much more clear. Trump is all about this. He's in on the regime change. That's what they're trying to do. That's why they evacuated Tehran. Netanyahu's wanted it for a long time. When reporters have asked him, do you want regime change? He even admits, like, yeah, I think that's a possibility at this point. He did that today, I believe, in an interview. So this is horrible Israel first foreign policy. Probably the biggest stain on Trump's entire legacy. You can put that on a lot of things, the fallout over Doge, the disaster that is the Epstein files that is clearly being concealed, and you have, cabinet members saying different things about it. Kash Patel's story doesn't even jive with Bondi's about what evidence exists. There's been so much madness here, and it's just so bad to be sucked into a new war. It just proves that America always leads with war, and we lead with the wars that Israel wants to fight almost every time. We did that with all the ones I listed earlier, and now we're in it with Iran. And, I guess I shouldn't be very surprised. I guess I'm not. But, if I'm a Trump fan and I thought that he was going to be a non-interventionist and I was, interested in seeing him do well, I wouldn't be happy right now. I'd be super frustrated. Heck, I'm frustrated too, but maybe I was more realistic going into it. But either way, I do want to hear from what you guys think. Is Glenn Greenwald right? To what extent were these negotiations a ruse? Is there any way for the U.S. to get out of this at this point, or is this just going to go through a full-fledged regime change operation? Let me know in the comments below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and consider supporting me by becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. That would help me immensely, and I'd really appreciate it. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.